The first thing Queen Lysara learned that night was not that her enemies had entered the throne room. It was that her friends had already left. I was standing 12 feet behind the royal dais when the alarm lights turned from gold to red, and I remember thinking the system had made a mistake. Palace alarms did not scream during coronations. Royal guards did not abandon their posts. Queens did not turn their heads and find empty space where a wall of armor had stood one heartbeat earlier. But there she was, Lysara Vare, sovereign of the Varen crown, ruler of 9 moons and 300 million citizens, suddenly alone beneath the silver banners of her ancestors. Alone, except for one human soldier nobody had bothered to respect. His name was Jack Mercer. At the time, that name meant nothing to us. It sounded plain, almost unfinished, like the label on a tool crate from some backwater shipping dock. Jack Mercer stood near the lower steps of the throne, 5 feet 11 inches of soft-looking earth mammal in a dark diplomatic security uniform that seemed embarrassingly underbuilt for a royal emergency. No ceremonial blade, no crown-forged shield, no plasma halo, just a sidearm, a compact rifle, and the kind of calm expression that made him look either brave or too slow to understand danger. I assumed the second. Most of us did. The human had arrived with the Terran delegation 3 days earlier, assigned as what the court politely called auxiliary protection. Auxiliary, in palace language, meant decorative. It meant politically necessary and tactically irrelevant. We had warriors with 6 arms, guards born under crushing gravity, veterans who had spent decades learning how to stand between a monarch and death. And yet, when the outer doors sealed and the emergency shutters dropped over the stained glass windows, those magnificent warriors found sudden reasons to be elsewhere. One moved to secure the East Corridor. Another claimed he had to protect the evacuation route. A third simply disappeared behind a pillar and did not come back. I watched Queen Lysara look left, then right, and for the first time in my service, I saw a royal certainty crack across her face. Not fear. Not exactly. More like the awful realization that betrayal does not always announce itself with a blade. Sometimes it arrives as silence where loyalty used to stand. Across the hall, the main doors opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. Figures in black court armor stepped through, slow and confident, their family crest hidden beneath gray cloth. House Dravik. Even before their leader spoke, every advisor in the chamber knew what it meant. This was not a raid. This was not a negotiation. This was an execution dressed as politics. Queen Lysara lifted her chin anyway, because queens are trained to look immortal even when the room has already counted them dead. Then she glanced at the human and said, very quietly, "Soldier, you are released from duty." Jack Mercer did not move. He did not salute dramatically. He did not make some grand speech for the history archives. He only shifted one step closer to the throne, placing himself between her and the open doors, and asked in that flat earth accent, "Ma'am, are you still my assignment?" The queen blinked. I forgot how to breathe. The Dravik leader laughed once, low and insulted, as if the universe had offered him a joke before victory. But Jack reached behind him, pressed the manual lock on the throne room doors, and the sound echoed through the chamber like a verdict. That was the moment I realized the human had not stayed because he failed to understand what was coming. He stayed because everyone else finally did. Before that night, Jack Mercer had been so easy to ignore that ignoring him had become part of palace routine. He stood where the Terran delegation placed him, near doors, near walls, near corners polished bright enough to reflect royal arrogance back at itself. He never interrupted. He never corrected anyone. He never reacted when nobles spoke over him as if Earth had sent a uniformed lamp with a pulse. That was the mistake we all made. We mistook quiet for simple. We mistook patience for weakness. I had read his file, or at least the version our diplomatic office considered worth translating. Human male, 34 Earth years. Former infantry. Security specialist. Height, 5 feet 11 inches. Weight, 186 pounds. No natural armor. No venom. No secondary heart. No implanted targeting spine. Compared to the Royal Guard, he looked almost unfinished, like evolution had submitted a rough draft and walked away for coffee. Our captain of guards, Lord Varric Sol, had once joked that a strong palace breeze might knock Mercer into the fountain court. Everyone laughed. Jack smiled politely, the way humans do when they are deciding whether a response is worth the oxygen. I remember Queen Lasara noticing that smile. She had asked me later if humans were always so calm when insulted. I told her no. I told her some species simply lacked the social awareness to understand when they had been dismissed. That answer embarrasses me now. Jack understood perfectly. He just filed the insult somewhere private and moved on. During his first day in the palace, he asked questions that seemed harmless. How thick were the throne room doors? How long did the shutters take to drop? Which guard station controlled the east corridor? Could the emergency locks be triggered manually if the central system failed? The palace staff thought it was charming. The little human wanted to feel useful. One technician even patted his shoulder and explained our security grid slowly, as though speaking to a child. Jack thanked him. Jack remembered every word. On the second day, he walked the ceremonial route 3 times. Not with the stiff pride of a soldier on display, but with the casual pace of a tourist studying paintings. He paused near air vents. He glanced at camera housings. He counted steps from the lower dais to each exit. At dinner, I mentioned this to Captain Varric. The captain waved one jeweled hand and said, "Let the Terran play guard. It keeps the Alliance happy." That was palace thinking in one sentence. We did not value Jack because he was not loud. He did not wear rank like jewelry. He did not carry a blade carved from ancestral bone. He did not announce his usefulness to every room he entered. In our culture, warriors made themselves visible. They projected threat. They took space. Jack did the opposite. He made himself smaller, quieter, easier to underestimate. Only now, with House Dravik crossing the marble floor and the Real Royal Guard scattered like spilled coins, did I understand the design of it. The human had spent 3 days being invisible in a palace full of people desperate to be seen. And because no one watched the invisible man, Jack Mercer had watched everyone. House Dravik did not rush us. That was the part that made the room colder. Raiders rush. Amateurs shout. People who are afraid of failure move too fast and make noise to hide it. The Dravik line walked across the marble like guests arriving late to dinner, 6 figures in black court armor, their boots striking the floor in a rhythm that sounded rehearsed. Their leader removed the gray cloth from his shoulder crest, and every noble still brave enough to look immediately lowered their eyes. Lord Kale Dravik. Old blood. Old money. Old hatred. His family had served the crown for 9 generations, which in palace language meant they had spent 9 generations standing close enough to study where loyalty could be cut without anyone noticing. He bowed to Queen Lasara with perfect etiquette. That somehow made it worse. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice smooth enough for a treaty table. "The council thanks you for your service. Not your kingdom. Not your people. Your service." Past tense. Queen Lasara did not step back, but her fingers tightened around the arm of the throne. I saw it because I was looking for fear. I found discipline instead. She had been raised from childhood to treat panic as a luxury for people without crowns. "This is treason," she said. Lord Dravik tilted his head as if correcting a student. "No, this is continuity." That single word explained everything. The empty guard posts. The sealed corridors. The delayed emergency broadcast. The way the palace security grid had chosen this exact minute to become confused, blind, and politely useless. This was not a strike against the throne. This was paperwork with weapons standing nearby. A transfer of power with all the ugly parts hidden behind ceremonial language. The royal court loved ceremonial language. It made terrible things sound respectable. Around me, advisors began, performing the quiet mathematics of survival. Who would pledge first? Who would apologize later? Who could claim they had always suspected Lasara was too young, too idealistic, too friendly with Earth? I hate admitting this, but I understood them. The Dravik family controlled 3 defense fleets, 2 mineral moons, and half the officer academy. Queen Lasara controlled the throne, a beautiful symbol that suddenly seemed very far away from actual power. Then Lord Dravik looked at Jack Mercer and smiled. Not a kind smile. The kind a rich man gives a parking attendant who has blocked the wrong car. "Human," he said, "you have been placed in an unfortunate room." Jack did not answer. He was watching the side balconies. Not Dravik's face. Not the obvious armor. The balconies. I followed his eyes and felt my stomach drop. Small movement behind the silk banners. 2 more figures above us. Maybe 3. The visible men on the floor were not the threat. They were the conversation. The real plan had layers. Jack saw those layers before I did, and I had served in that palace for 22 years. Lord Dravik continued, clearly annoyed that the human had not started trembling on schedule. Step aside and you will be returned to your delegation unharmed. Earth need not embarrass itself over Varen internal politics. That insult landed exactly where he intended. A few nobles gave nervous little laughs, grateful for permission to feel superior again. Jack finally looked at him. Just looked. No anger. No drama. Nothing a court poet could use. Then he reached down, touched the old Earth flag patch on his sleeve, and said, "Internal politics usually do not need hidden shooters." The room went silent so fast I heard Queen Lysura inhale. Lord Dravik's smile disappeared by half an inch. Not much. Enough. For the first time since the doors opened, someone other than the Queen had made him react. And the someone was the decorative human we had spent 3 days ignoring. Queen Lysura understood the danger before the rest of us accepted it. That was the burden of a crown, I suppose. Advisors could deny. Nobles could calculate. Traitors could dress their ambition in polished words. But a queen, standing at the center of a room built to worship her survival, knew when survival had become the one thing nobody intended to allow. She looked from Lord Dravik to the dark balconies, then to Jack Mercer, and something in her expression changed. Not weakness. Mercy. Toward him. Imagine that. The monarch had been abandoned by her own guard, surrounded by smiling enemies, watched by a court already deciding how to kneel to the next ruler, and the only person she tried to save was the foreign soldier everyone else had dismissed. "Mercer," she said, low enough that only those near the throne heard it clearly. "I gave you an order." Jack kept his eyes forward. "Yes, ma'am." "Then obey it." "I am considering it." That earned a sharp breath from one of the nobles behind me. No one considered a royal command. Not out loud. Not in the throne hall. But Lysura did not rebuke him. She stepped down one stair, the silver hem of her formal robe brushing the marble, and for the first time I saw the young woman beneath the crown. She was 27 standard years old, which on Earth would have made her barely older than some graduate students. Yet our empire had placed 3 moons, 9 fleets, and centuries of expectation on her shoulders. "Your treaty assignment was ceremonial protection," she said. "It does not include succession conflict. It does not include noble rebellion. It does not include dying in someone else's palace." Lord Dravik smiled again, enjoying the exchange. He believed it proved his point. The Queen was isolated. The human was trapped. The court was witnessing an act of sentimental stupidity before the inevitable correction of history. I believed something close to that myself. Jack finally turned his head just enough to look at Lysura. His face was calm, but not empty. There was a tiredness there, the kind carried by people who have seen too many rooms decide that decent behavior is optional when the cost becomes high. "With respect, Your Majesty," he said, "Earth does not write promises that way." The Queen stared at him. "You are one man." "Yes, ma'am." "They have the room." "No, ma'am." That answer landed strangely. Not loud. Not heroic. Just certain. Lord Dravik's soldiers shifted for the first time, a subtle ripple of irritation moving through black armor. Jack noticed. Of course he noticed. He seemed to notice everything except fear. Lysura lowered her voice even more. "If you stay, I cannot protect you." Jack gave her a small smile, almost apologetic. That was not the deal. I did not understand what deal he meant until later, when the Terran ambassador showed us the original security clause. It was only 14 words long. Protect the principal until relieved, removed, or physically unable to continue. Human legal writing, apparently, had no room for poetic escape. Queen Lysura read the meaning on his face before any of us did. She straightened slowly, and the crack in her royal mask disappeared. Not because rescue had arrived, because one person had refused to leave. Across the hall, Lord Dravik sighed as though bored by honor. "How touching," he said. "A primitive with principles." Jack looked back at him and moved his thumb over the safety switch on his old Earth rifle. The sound was small, barely a click, yet every creature in that room heard it. "Sir," Jack said, polite as a man holding a door at a grocery store, "you keep saying primitive like it means untrained." That was when Queen Lysura stopped trying to save him. Not because she wanted him to risk himself, because she finally understood he had never been asking permission to stay. He had been giving the room one last chance to make better decisions. The mistake Lord Dravik made was believing patience belonged to the powerful. In his world, delay meant control. A noble paused because everyone else had to wait. A commander lifted one finger because entire rooms were trained to freeze. So when Jack Mercer stood still, Dravik assumed the human was hesitating. He assumed the small creature from Earth was weighing fear against duty and discovering that duty was lighter. I watched that assumption settle over his face like perfume. Expensive, confident, and wrong. Final courtesy, Dravik said, raising one hand toward the hidden balconies. Step away from the monarch. Jack glanced up again, not at the nearest balcony, but at the reflection of it in the polished silver pillar beside the throne. That was when I noticed the old ceremonial column was showing him angles the rest of us could not see. We had placed those pillars there to honor dead kings. Jack was using them like mirrors in a convenience store. It was insulting how practical humans could be with sacred architecture. How many courtesies do you usually give? Jack asked. Before the shooting starts. A few nobles flinched at the word. Dravik did not. Enough to prove we were civilized. Jack nodded once, as if that answered something important. Good. I was worried you thought this was subtle. The room tightened. Even the air felt like it had leaned forward. One of Dravik's armored escorts took a step to the right, trying to widen the angle around Jack and toward the queen. It was a small adjustment, the kind palace duelists used before formal challenges. Jack's rifle moved half an inch. Not raised. Not aimed. Just moved. The escort stopped. I do not know why. Nothing obvious had happened. There was no grand display, no shout, no threat carved into the walls. Yet the escort stopped as if he had walked to the edge of a cliff and found the ground missing. Queen Lysara saw it too. Her eyes shifted from the escort to Jack's hands. Human hands looked unimpressive to us. 5 fingers, no talons, no gripping spines, no ceremonial rings of command. But Jack's hands were steady in a way that made decoration seem dangerous. He had one finger resting along the rifle frame, not on the trigger. Another hand hovered near a compact device clipped to his belt. His shoulders were loose. His weight was balanced. He looked less like a trapped guard and more like a man waiting for an elevator he already knew was coming. Dravik's patience thinned. You are delaying the inevitable. Jack gave him that mild human expression again, the one we had mistaken for politeness. No, sir. I am letting your people finish choosing where to stand. That sentence did something to the room. The hidden figures above stopped shifting. The escorts below stopped spreading out. Even Dravik's hand lowered a fraction. Because suddenly, it was clear Jack had not been watching one enemy. He had been assigning them. Door, balcony, pillar, queen, civilians, sight lines, escape paths. Every movement they made gave him more information, and he had been quietly collecting all of it while we were busy being terrified. Lord Dravik recovered first, but not fully. His voice sharpened. You speak as though this chamber belongs to you. Jack looked at the manual lock beside the sealed doors, then at the shuttered windows, then back at Dravik. For the next few minutes, he said, that depends on how smart you are. It should have sounded ridiculous. One human, one old rifle, one borrowed uniform, warning the most dangerous noble house in the empire to behave wisely. But nobody laughed this time. Not even the cowards hiding behind court benches. Dravik's leader in the balcony made the smallest motion, barely a shadow against silk. Jack saw it in the pillar reflection. He did not turn. He only spoke to Queen Lysara, calm and quiet. Your Majesty, please take one step down and stay behind my left shoulder. She obeyed before pride could argue. That was the second impossible thing of the night. The first was that her guards had run. The second was that the queen trusted the human who had not. The palace cameras failed before anyone in the room admitted the fight had begun. Later, the official inquiry would call it a technical interruption caused by signal overload during a security breach. That was the polite version. The true version was simpler and far more embarrassing. Jack Mercer made the most advanced royal surveillance system in 3 sectors blink at exactly the wrong moment. I saw his left hand move toward the device on his belt. Nothing dramatic. No glowing weapon. No Terran battle anthem. Just one thumb pressing one plain black switch that looked like it belonged on a garage door opener. The throne room lights flickered once. The security lenses along the upper walls snapped toward him, confused, then froze in place. Every recording crystal dimmed from blue to gray. 2.7 seconds disappeared from the palace archive, and in royal politics, 2.7 seconds can become a lifetime. Lord Dravik shouted something. But the sound came strangely late, as if the room itself had paused to understand the insult. The figure on the balcony moved first. I only knew that because the silk banner shifted. Jack did not look up. He stepped backward, not away from danger, but into the exact place Queen Lysara had just vacated. His shoulder passed in front of hers by less than a foot. At the same time, his right hand lifted the old earth rifle, not in a sweeping heroic motion, but in a short, efficient line that made every ceremonial sword in that chamber feel like theater props. There was a flash from above, bright enough to paint the marble white. Jack was already somewhere else. I am not exaggerating for legend. I wish I were. One instant he stood beside the throne. The next, he had shifted 3 feet to the left, using the heavy royal banner pole as cover with the casual certainty of a man stepping around a puddle. The first attack struck the floor where the queen had been standing one breath earlier. No explosion, no grand fireball, just a sharp burst of energy that left a smoking black mark on the polished stone and turned every noble face pale. Queen Lysara made one sound, not a scream, more like anger trying to become fear and failing. Jack did not look back at her. "Stay low, ma'am," he said. Calm, almost bored. That calm hurt my pride more than the treason did. We had entire academies devoted to crisis discipline, breathing exercises, command posture, mental shielding, all of it. This human sounded like a man asking someone to duck under a low doorway. Then the second balcony figure revealed himself. Jack had already pointed in his direction. Not because he reacted quickly, because he had been waiting for that exact reveal. His rifle gave a controlled pulse. Light snapped across the upper rail, and the figure vanished behind the banner with a startled crash that sounded more humiliating than harmful. That was when the court understood something terrible. Jack was not surviving by luck. He was ahead. Lord Dravik's escorts finally moved together, spreading toward the queen in practiced formation. Jack's other hand flicked something small across the floor. It rolled between them, clicked twice, and released a cloud of silver dust that clung to armor joints and visor seams. Not poison, not fire. Terran marker foam, as we learned later, designed to blind sensors, lock targeting systems, and make expensive equipment suddenly behave like wet cardboard. 3 elite Dravik soldiers stopped at once, trapped not by strength, but by inconvenience engineered with American spite. Jack stepped through the confusion like he had drawn the room on paper years before. One escort reached for him. Jack turned his shoulder, redirected the movement, and the larger soldier found himself sitting hard on the marble, stunned by the indignity of gravity. Another tried to circle toward Lysara. Jack placed one boot on the fallen banner cord, pulled, and dropped a curtain of royal silk between the queen and the attack lane. The whole exchange lasted less time than it takes to sneeze. When the cameras came back, the room looked impossible. The queen was alive. The balcony threats were gone from sight. 3 escorts were disabled without a single heroic speech. Jack Mercer stood in front of the throne with his rifle steady and his breathing unchanged. Lord Dravik stared at him, and for the first time that night, his expression lost the comfort of destiny. Jack tilted his head slightly and said, "You brought court assassins to a protection detail." Then he gave the smallest shrug I had ever seen. That was a planning error. Lord Dravik should have stopped when Jack Mercer said that. I know this because every survival instinct I owned was already begging me to crawl under the nearest council bench and develop a sudden interest in floor design. But nobles are strange creatures. Give them 1,000 years of family portraits, inherited ships, and servants trained to look impressed, and they start believing the universe owes them cooperation. Dravik did not see a warning. He saw disrespect. His face tightened, his crest darkened, and the pleasant mask finally slipped far enough for the monster underneath to look ordinary. "You are not palace security," he snapped. Jack shifted his stance, placing one shoulder between the queen and the widest open lane. "Correct. You are not Varen military." "Also correct. Then you have no authority here." Jack gave him a look so mild it felt personally insulting to everyone who had ever feared a rank badge. "That is where you are confused." Dravik laughed, but it came out thinner this time. Behind him, the escorts were trying to reset their formation. They could not. The silver foam had turned their beautiful armor into expensive furniture. The hidden balcony team had stopped moving. The nobles had stopped whispering. Even Queen Lysara was staring at Jack now, not like a rescued monarch, but like someone hearing a locked door open inside her own understanding of the world. Jack touched the small transmitter at his collar. Mercer to Terran relay. Confirmation phase complete. Crown Principal alive. Coup network exposed. Begin legal handoff. The words meant nothing to me at first. Legal handoff sounded soft. Administrative. The kind of phrase diplomats used when they wanted to ruin dinner slowly. Then every communication screen in the throne room activated at once. Not with static. Not with Dravic propaganda. With copies. Files. Messages. Payment trails. Security edits. Guard rotation changes. Private oaths stamped with noble seals. The entire conspiracy appeared above us in clean Terran formatting, because apparently humans did not just catch traitors. They made presentations. Lord Dravic went still. That was the first time I saw true fear on him. Not fear of Jack's rifle. Not fear of the Queen. Fear of documentation. Jack had not been placed in the throne room as decoration. He had been bait with a badge. 3 days of questions. 3 days of quiet walking. 3 days of letting arrogant people explain palace systems to the harmless human, and all of it had been recorded, mapped, cross-checked, and sent to Earth intelligence. The Royal Guard had not simply failed. They had identified themselves. The empty posts were evidence. The delayed alarms were evidence. The hidden shooters were evidence. Every cowardly step away from Lysara had signed a confession no blade could erase. Queen Lysara's voice came softly from behind him. You knew? Jack did not turn around. We suspected. And you? Did not tell me. Could not, ma'am. If the wrong person believed you were prepared, they would have moved the attempt somewhere crowded. He paused just long enough for that to sink in. This room had shutters, locks, limited entry points, and a monarch stubborn enough to stand her ground. It was the safest bad option. I almost hated him for how calmly he said it. Safest bad option. Only a human could describe a royal coup like a difficult parking situation. Dravic found his voice again, but it had lost its polished weight. You used the Queen as bait. Jack's eyes hardened for the first time. Not rage. Something colder. Professional disappointment. No, he said. You did. That sentence hit harder than any weapon in the room. Queen Lysara straightened behind him, and I watched the last trace of uncertainty leave her face. She was not being rescued from her throne. She was being handed back the truth of it. Jack lifted his chin toward the frozen guards, the exposed nobles, the silent assassins, and the screens glowing with their secrets. I was assigned to protect the principal, he said. The door was never the principal. Dravic looked at the Queen, then at the evidence, then at the human soldier he had called primitive. And at last, at long last, he understood that Jack Mercer had not been trapped in the throne room with him. House Dravic had been trapped in there with Jack. The royal guards returned with perfect timing, which is to say they returned after the hard part was over. The western doors unlocked from the outside with a ceremonial chime so proud and useless that several nobles actually turned toward it like rescue had arrived wearing polished boots. Captain Varric Sol entered first, his armor bright, his blade drawn, his face arranged into the expression of a man prepared to be praised for courage he had recently misplaced. Behind him came 12 guards in full royal formation, moving fast enough to look urgent and slow enough to suggest they had not expected any real danger to remain. Your Majesty, Varric called, voice ringing through the chamber. We have secured the evacuation route. Queen Lysara did not answer. She was standing behind Jack Mercer's left shoulder, exactly where he had placed her, calm as winter sunlight. Around the room, House Dravic's people were locked in place by Terran marker foam, disabled equipment, sealed exits, and the terrible social pressure of being exposed in front of everyone they had planned to impress. Above us, the screens still glowed with evidence. Names, transfers, guard schedules, secret messages, the kind of facts that make brave speeches unnecessary. Captain Varric slowed when he saw them. Then he saw Jack. Then he saw Lord Dravic, no longer smiling, standing beneath his own betrayal like a man trapped under a falling statue. What is this? Varric demanded. It was an excellent question for someone hoping the answer had not already been broadcast to half the Empire. Jack turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge him without giving him the courtesy of full attention. Captain, please keep your hands visible. The room froze again. Not because Jack had raised his voice. He had not. He sounded like a state trooper during a routine traffic stop. That somehow made it worse. Varric's crest flared. You dare command the Royal Guard? Queen Lysara finally spoke. He is not commanding the Royal Guard. Her voice was quiet, but it crossed the throne room like a drawn line. He is preventing the Royal Guard from making one final mistake. Varric looked at her, and for one brief second I saw a calculation behind his outrage. Could he still lie? Could he claim confusion? Could he insist the evidence was forged, the delay unavoidable, the abandoned posts an unfortunate misunderstanding? The screens answered before he did. One image enlarged on its own, a Terran system highlighting Varric's private authorization code attached to a security shutdown order issued 6 minutes before the alarm. Humans, I learned that night, have a gift for timing embarrassment. Jack tapped his collar transmitter. Relay, mark Captain Sol present at scene. Confirm code match. A clear human voice responded through the chamber speakers. Confirmed. Match probability, 99.8%. The number was almost cruel. It left him just enough room to hope and no room to escape. The guards behind Varric began stepping away from him, each one suddenly discovering a deep personal interest in distance. That was when the balance of the room changed. Not with a charge, not with a duel. With 12 trained soldiers realizing the safest place in the throne room was not beside their captain. It was behind the queen. One by one, they lowered their weapons and turned toward Lysara. Late loyalty is still late, but it is better than continued stupidity. Lord Dravic saw it happen and understood his rebellion had ended without the glorious final scene his family history deserved. Jack had taken away the performance. He had denied them martyrdom, drama, and mystery. He had left them with records, witnesses, and a queen who was no longer alone. Queen Lysara stepped out from behind him at last. Jack did not stop her. He only shifted enough to keep every angle covered, because apparently even history had to wait until security was satisfied. She descended the final step of the dais and faced the room that had betrayed her. Seal the palace, she said. Notify the fleet. Detain every name on those screens, beginning with Captain Sol and Lord Dravic. No one argued. That may have been the most shocking part. Our empire had spent centuries believing power came from bloodline, armor, and ancient houses. Yet in that moment, power looked like a young queen giving lawful orders while a human soldier stood nearby with calm eyes and an old Earth flag on his sleeve. The guards who had run now moved quickly to obey. Jack watched them with the polite suspicion of a man who had already learned exactly what their promises were worth. By dawn, the palace no longer sounded like a palace. It sounded like an airport after every flight had been canceled, except the travelers were nobles, admirals, ministers, and traders suddenly discovering that expensive robes did not make hand restraints feel more dignified. The coup did not collapse with thunder. It collapsed with signatures, testimony, frozen bank accounts, and Terran evidence packets, so organized they made our legal scholars look like children sorting crayons. Queen Lysara held emergency court from the same throne room, where she had nearly been erased from her own history. The black mark on the marble remained near the lower steps, not cleaned, not covered, not apologized for. She ordered it preserved. A reminder, she said, that loyalty is not proven by standing near power when it is safe. Jack Mercer stood 30 feet away during the hearing, close enough to act, far enough to avoid attention. That was very human of him, I thought. Terrifyingly human. The royal physicians tried to examine him 3 times. He declined twice, then accepted on the 3rd attempt only because Queen Lysara looked at him and said, "Do not make me turn survival into a royal command." He gave her a tired smile and said, "Yes, ma'am." The doctors found bruises, stress strain, a cracked armor plate, and a pulse rate that insulted every medical theory they had about fear. One physician asked if all humans were built like him. Jack said no. Then he paused and added, "Some are worse." No one laughed. We had learned caution by then. At sunrise, Queen Lysara summoned the remaining court, the Terran ambassador, and every commander still loyal enough to stand without shaking. She did not wear battle armor. She wore the plain silver crown of First Judgment, the crown young monarchs wear when they stop asking permission from history. Captain Varric and Lord Dravic were not present. Their names were spoken only as evidence. The queen raised one hand, and the chamber fell silent, so completely I could hear the distant engines of the capital ships holding orbit above us. Yesterday, she said, this court classified Terran personnel as auxiliary security. Her eyes moved across the nobles, and several of them found the floor fascinating. That classification is revoked. A clerk lifted the royal archive tablet. By order of the crown, human close protection officers will be entered into Varen doctrine under a new designation. She looked toward Jack then, not as a ruler looks at a servant, not even as a queen looks at a soldier, as one living being looks at the person who stayed when every symbol failed. Last line species, she said. The words passed through the chamber like a door closing on the old universe. Jack looked uncomfortable, which somehow made him more impressive. Humans could face a room full of enemies, apparently, but sincere recognition made them want to crawl into a maintenance closet. The Terran ambassador hid a smile behind one hand. Queen Lysara descended from the throne and stopped in front of Jack. For one wild moment, every noble thought she might kneel. She did not. Queens do not kneel in their own halls. Instead, she placed 2 fingers lightly against the earth flag on his sleeve. Your people have a phrase, she said. No one left behind. Jack nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. We will remember it correctly. Years later, children in our empire would learn a simplified version of that night. They would hear that the guards ran and the humans stayed. They would imagine flashing lights, sealed doors, and a queen refusing to fall. They would not understand the smaller truth, the one that mattered more. Jack Mercer did not save Lysara because humans are fearless. He was afraid. I saw it later in the way his hands finally shook when the room was safe. He stayed because fear, to humans, is not always in order. Sometimes it is only information. That was what changed us. Not their weapons. Not their strength. Not even their strange talent for turning furniture, locks, and legal clauses into battlefield advantages. It was the promise. We believed loyalty was a matter of rank, blood, and oath ceremonies under golden banners. Humans made it simpler and much more dangerous. You said you would stand there. So you stand there. Even if the armor leaves. Even if the room turns against you. Even if a queen tells you to run. That morning, I rewrote my private report to the council. The first version had called Jack Mercer an unusually disciplined Terran soldier. I deleted that sentence. It was too small. The final version was only 1 line, and it became the most quoted warning in Varen military history. If every guard runs, find the human.